Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. I'll go first. I get one privilege. I'm going to go first. Yeah, it's debatable, yes. Members, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to welcome to Saskatchewan and to our legislative building a delegation from Western Australia who are seated in the Speaker's Gallery. They're in Saskatchewan to take part in the Saskatchewan-Western Australia Parliamentary Exchange. And when I read your name, maybe just give a wave for us. And they are the Honourable Martin Aldridge, Member of the Legislative Council and representing the Agricultural Region. Honorary Diane Evers, Member of the Legislative Council and representing the Southwest Region. Mr. Shane Love, Member of the Legislative Assembly and representing the District of Moore. Ms. Christine Kane, the Clerk Assistant of Committees for the Legislative Council, and Mr. Scott Nalder, Deputy Clerk for the Legislative Assembly. And I'll ask all members to welcome our guests to Saskatchewan. You've got a busy week, and thanks for coming. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join with you in welcoming our Western Australian delegates. I was involved in the program and also went to Australia, where I actually learned about your structure, and it helped me in my role as Government House Leader, how I applied some things here. So I hope you will benefit and take that experience back home with you. So, and I know that you will enjoy your stay here in Saskatchewan, and I know we will treat you as well as I was treated in Australia, which was very well. So on behalf of the Government of Saskatchewan, I welcome you to our province of Saskatchewan and to our legislature. Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
I recognize the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with my colleague on the other side, as well as yourself, Mr. Speaker, in welcoming the Australian delegates to our Legislative Assembly. It's a great opportunity, not just for you folks, but for us as well, to learn as parliamentarians a bit about each other's processes and ways we can grow and develop. I hope, as my colleague had said, that your time here is is valuable and productive, and I know we will feel the same. So I ask all members to join me in welcoming them to our Legislative Assembly.
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to all members of this Assembly some additional special guests that have joined us here today, and with us are two distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps in Ottawa. Mr. Speaker, with us we have His Excellency Thomas Luke, the Ambassador to Estonia, and His Excellency Asoka Agirahagamo. Mr. Speaker, the Ambassador and the High Commissioner are on a cross-country tour, he's the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka. Mr. Speaker, the Ambassador and the High Commissioner are on a cross-country tour, learning more about our great nation of Canada, and I believe this is their first visit to this province, our province of Saskatchewan, where they'll be meeting with several ministers, and I believe they'll also be meeting with yourself, Mr. Speaker. Both gentlemen are relatively new to our nation, and both bring a long experience in international diplomacy to their duties and to their service in their country. Ambassador Luke has served his government in Latvia, in Georgia, in Armenia, and he was Estonia's ambassador to China, Mongolia, as well as Vietnam. The High Commissioner has served as Sri Lankan's ambassador to Oman, and prior to his current appointment has held senior positions in the Sri Lankan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, we are grateful that these gentlemen would include our province, the province of Saskatchewan, on their fact-finding mission across our nation of Canada. We wish them all the best in their travels, and I would ask all members to join with me in welcoming them to our Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the Premier in wishing a warm Tara Tulemast to Ambassador Thomas Luke of Estonia, and Piliganami to the High Commissioner Asoka Girihagama from Sri Lanka. It's so good to have both of those dignitaries here with us today, along with the Australian delegation. We are a province that has, of course, been built up through trade relationships with other countries, with relationships of exchange of understanding with other countries, and with the people of other countries, as our province's motto is, from many people's strength, and that is seen in the many faces and many backgrounds that make up the people across the province. So we would very much like to welcome these visitors today and hope that you will be received everywhere you are on your trip in Saskatchewan as warmly as we would like to receive you, all the members would like to receive you to this house today.
I recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join in welcoming these guests with the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition. The High Commissioner Asoka Girihagama met earlier today. I had a good visit with him, as well as Ambassador Thomas Luke. With them as well is a good friend of mine for many years, Mr. Jerry Sherman. He is the President of Embassy Connections Ottawa, out of Canada, out of Ottawa. Runs a great ministry there, interacting with all kinds of different ambassadors. I had the opportunity to speak at an event with him February 23rd, 2 years ago, the day before I started treatment. And he's just a great friend and a real asset to our whole country in the interaction he has with these diplomats. And it's also his birthday today, Mr. Speaker. Oh. So I join with welcoming all these guests to their Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I request leave for an extended introduction.
Minister's requested leave for extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the Minister.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and my pleasure this afternoon to introduce some amazing Saskatchewan athletes who are here today, and a coach who represented our province so well and our country at the 2019 Special Olympic World Games in Abu Dhabi from March 14th to 21st. First is Addison Sayawuli. Addison is from Saskatoon and became part of the Special O movement when she was 9 years old. 18 years later, Addison has earned medals at the provincial and national level. And now at the international level, Mr. Speaker, Addison won bronze medal in the 100-meter run and placed 7th in shot put. Richard Dolan is a veteran Special Olympic athlete competing for 21 years. He took the bowling competition by storm, winning gold in the 10-pin bowling team, silver in the 10-pin bowling single, and bronze in the 10-pin bowling doubles. Colby Kosteniuk is 17 years old and has already been competing with Special O for 4 years. This was Colby's first World Games in swimming. He took home gold in the 400-meter freestyle and 4x100-meter medley relay. He also won a silver in the 1500-meter freestyle and finished 4th in the 800-meter freestyle. Dawn Reven is from Regina and has been involved with Special O since 2014. At the World Games, she won a gold in 10-pin bowling doubles, and placed 4th in the 10-pin bowling team and singles events. Michael Ching is a veteran when it comes to swimming in the Special Olympics and competing in World Games. He's been involved in Special O for 14 years, and this was his 4th, Mr. Speaker, World Games. He's won gold medals in the 800-meter freestyle, 4x100-meter medley relay, and the 1500-meter freestyle. If that wasn't enough, Mike also won bronze in the 400-meter freestyle. Tiana Zimmerman is from Engelfeld, and this was her first World Games. In swimming, she won the gold medal in the 4x50-meter freestyle relay, bronze in the 800-meter freestyle, and 4th in the 400-meter freestyle event. So all these athletes, congratulations to your commitment and love of sport, and you're certainly role models for us all. We're very proud of you. And we also have a coach, Jackie Powell, has been a coach for the past 23 years. We thank Jackie, and I'd also acknowledge in the West Gallery there are some coaches and some parents, and Faye Matt is up there as well, CEO of Special Olympics. Many in this house will know her well. Again, Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of these athletes who dedicated so much time and have made our province and our country so very proud in the recent World Games. I ask all members to help me congratulate them today.
As a member of the Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the opposition, I would like to join the minister in welcoming and recognizing these athletes. Wow, look at those medals. You're so impressive. Good stuff, and you really do represent us well across the world, and whether it's been the 4th Games or the 1st Games, it's always exciting, and each win is a big thing. But to participate and represent our province so well, thank you so much. So we welcome you to your legislature and to your family and friends up in the galleries too. Thank you very much.
I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to introduce some special guests that have joined us here today. With us today, we have Mike and Bonnie Keoghan in the top row there. Joining with Mike and Bonnie is their son David, who is presently employed as well, he's kind of covering 2 jobs actually, Mr. Speaker, as my executive assistant as well as my itinerary coordinator, Mr. Speaker, and we're lean in the Premier's office. I can attest to, Mr. Speaker. David is the guy who actually has the opportunity in our travels to tell the Premier where to go from time to time. But I am happy to report, Mr. Speaker, that Mike and Bonnie that there are occasions, report to Mike and Bonnie that there are occasions, and we argue often on the road, but there are the odd occasion where your son David, he does reach the level of what could be considered acceptable. And in the Premier's office, compliments are few and far between, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, they're at many times deemed unnecessary. So, Mr. Speaker, on a more serious note, David is an extremely hard worker. He's an extremely valuable part of our Executive Council team, and it's greatly appreciated the effort that he brings each and every day. It's not so much appreciated the effort that he brings in the collusion that he has with my wife in voting me down on all of the good ideas that I have on the opportunity that she has to join us, Mr. Speaker. So we try to split those up. I will travel with my wife at times, David at other times, and when they come together, I don't get my way. Mr. Speaker, David comes by his work ethic honestly. I understand Mike and Bonnie, and I've heard much about it in our travels, that they have a grocery store here in the city of Regina, Mr. Speaker. It's Mike's, your independent grocer. It's located on Broadway Avenue in the constituency of Regina Douglas Park. Mr. Speaker, they opened this grocery store in 2013 and then converted it to an extra food store. And I'm told by David numerous times that it employs not only about 100 people, but it is one of the best grocery stores, if not only in Regina, across the province, Mr. Speaker. And David is a great advocate for his parents' business. Mr. Speaker, I'm certain all of us in this Assembly are thankful and grateful for the many contributions that the Keoghans have made to the city of Regina and the province of Saskatchewan, not just through the operation of of a store that employs 100 people in this city, but also through the community activities that they partake in. Mr. Speaker, the Keogans are longtime residents of your constituency, the constituency of Regina Coronation Park. Mike is active in the Masonic Lodge, the Wawa Shriners, and Bonnie is an avid curler. Mr. Speaker, the couple have worked hard, and they have raised three fine children in David and Dylan and Fallon. And I would, at this point, Mr. Speaker, like all members of this Assembly, to join me in welcoming Mike, Bonnie, and David Keogan to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Energy and Resources.
Extended introduction, Mr. Speaker.
Minister's requested leave for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us today in your gallery and on behalf of the member for Batoche and I, and all of us, we would like to welcome 12 fine folks from the RMs of Blucher and Aberdeen, including first responders and firefighters. They all played and continue to play a key role in the Blucher Aberdeen Emergency Services Building in my constituency, whose grand opening was last fall. Getting it up and running, Mr. Speaker, was an amazing collaboration between these two RMs, working together for the good and safety of everybody in their communities. So joining us today, if you could just give a brief wave. Dan Graschuk, Reeve, RM of Blucher. Francis Baim, Deputy Reeve, RM of Blucher. Martin Betker, Reeve, RM of Aberdeen. Kevin Kirk, Councillor, Division 3, RM of Aberdeen. Rael Hameline, Councillor, Division 4, RM of Aberdeen. Gary Zadek, Administrator, RM of Aberdeen, and Graham White, Councillor, Division 1, RM of Aberdeen. Also joining us, Mr. Speaker, are first responders Shirley Huffman, Bernadette Hameline, and Gail McLeod, and firefighters Adrian Hameline, Fire Chief, and Cameron Woodsky, Deputy Fire Chief. Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the work our first responders and volunteer firefighters do every day, which is why in the 1920 budget we've introduced 3 new tax credits for volunteer firefighters, search and rescue volunteers, and volunteer emergency first responders. Please join me, Mr. Speaker, in thanking them for all they do and welcoming this great group to the Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to join with the Minister and welcome these guests to their Assembly, these leaders within our province. I had the pleasure to meet with this delegation briefly outside the Legislature here today. I had a good brief conversation and the ability to thank them for their work, but it's an honour to do so on behalf of the official opposition and on the record. First responders, emergency responders, volunteer firefighters, volunteer search and rescue, folks across our province respond at times of crisis and at a time when often minutes matter in the lives of people and communities. We couldn't be more grateful for their leadership and their service. We thank them for that. Certainly we're proud to support the tax credit, and we're proud to have also advocated and pushed for the inclusion of search and rescue in that tax credit. Today, I welcome the leaders from the RM of Blucher, the RM of Aberdeen, and those that serve our communities and our province so proudly. Thank you.
I recognize a member for Moose Jaw North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the West Gallery, we've got 22 special guests. Those are the 22 students from the grade 12 social studies students from Vanier Collegiate in my constituency. We're going to have a visit with them a little later, and then we will have a picture taken if they'll let me. Along with them is their teacher, Dina Skoropad. So I would ask all my colleagues to welcome them to the Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I want to join with my colleague from Moose Jaw in welcoming the school group. Dana is a friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years. He's from my constituency in Chamberlain. He's an excellent educator, always tries to bring a school group once a year to legislature, and I'm glad that he was able to bring a group again this year. I want to welcome himself and his students to their legislature.
Recognize the member for Regina Wall Shakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to you and through you, I'd like to introduce 27 grade 4 students from Ecole St. Mary up in the West Gallery. They're accompanied by their teacher Brady Mann, and along with parent chaperones Peggy Vippen, Eva Kwan, Danielle Kreutzer, Aaron Rockbar, and Irene and Dennis Auger. We'll be able to have a picture with them at the staircase after question period, Mr. Speaker, and then have a question and answer with them after that. So I look forward to the conversation. So I'll welcome them to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seated in your gallery, I have a special guest from my constituency. 9-year-old Josh Baker is here today, who's come down to watch proceedings. Wave, Josh. And Josh has brought with him his father, Cam Baker, who now works for Nutrien, but used to work in this building for as Chief of Staff in a number of different ministries, and I think has been with Energy Resources, Environment, Economy, and a number of others. I'm really pleased to see these people here today. They're great folks. Cam and his wife Veronica, who does communications at Saskatoon Public School Board, have recently purchased a turkey, and as the members opposite are well aware, this is the season for buying turkeys and having the great turkey fundraiser, and I'm just giving them the last opportunity to pick up a turkey. Yeah. But I would ask that all members welcome Josh and Cam to their legislature today.
Recognize the member for Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to join with the Minister in welcoming Josh and Cam Baker to their Legislative Assembly. Certainly, Cam knows his way around these halls very well, and I thought I'd sensed a disturbance in the force, Mr. Speaker, but it's good to see Cam here today at his Legislative Assembly, and also, very happy to hear about his turkey, successes. So, many happy returns, Mr. Speaker, and again, all the best to Cam, Veronica, and to their son, Josh.
Recognize the member for Moosomin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce in the West Gallery my wife, Candace. She joined me here today for dinner, and I'm not sure what to say because the caucus staff didn't provide me any briefing notes. But I'm glad she's here, and I'd like all members to help me welcome my wife to her Legislative Assembly. And while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to say a special welcome to our guests from Western Australia. I happened to spend 4 years of my life in Western Australia, and in the early 90s. And I just beg all members of our legislature to not repay the hospitality that I received when I was in Western Australia. But welcome, and I'd like all members to help me, to join me in welcoming them to our Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Biggar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the Premier also in introducing David Keoghan's mother and dad, Mike and Bonnie. Of course, Mike was originally from Biggar, and I don't know if you ever were old enough to vote in Biggar constituency, but I've known Mike for many, many years. I guess my brother was married to your sister at one time. And so we've got to know each other quite well. But I also remember the many stories of Mike coming over to my mother-in-law's place for meals, and he used to always talk about the wonderful meals you got, but that was way before my time too. So please join me in welcoming Mike and Bonnie to the Legislative Assembly.
Yeah, there's got to be somebody that didn't get introduced. Anyway, there we go. All right, presenting petitions. Recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present petitions once again today on behalf of concerned citizens and people and communities and local businesses from right across Saskatchewan as it relates to the Sask Party government's choice to impose the PST and to hike it and to impose it onto the construction industry, Mr. Speaker. Quite simply, this is the epitome of a job-killing tax at a time where we need to be creating jobs and strengthening and building our economy. The impacts have been significant, Mr. Speaker. We see permits down all across the province. We see projects that have been shelved. We see thousands of hardworking tradespeople that have lost their jobs Mr. Speaker, so many of those tradespeople that have been forced to move outside of Saskatchewan, and that's a real loss because these are tradespeople that are wanting to build the province that they know and love, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the PST has hit households hard, Mr. Speaker. An $800 increase to the PST paid by the average household in just over 4 years, Mr. Speaker. That's a 70% increase and certainly hurts households, but hurts our economy, Mr. Speaker. The prayer reads as follows. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to stop saddling families and businesses with the costs of their mismanagement and immediately reinstate the PST exemption on construction and stop hurting Saskatchewan businesses and families. These petitions today are signed by concerned residents from Moose Jaw. I so submit.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Westview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition on behalf of concerned citizens of Saskatchewan. These individuals are fundamentally against the out-of-touch carbon tax imposed by Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberal government. The provinces opposed to this tax now include Manitoba, New Brunswick and Ontario, and in a few short hours we hope Alberta will join us. This tax will have damaging consequences on our province's vital agricultural industry, for families heating their homes in tough Saskatchewan winters, and it will cost even more for families to fuel up their cars to take a summer vacation. This unfair taxation will affect all Saskatchewan families' quality of life. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action to cause the government of Saskatchewan to take the necessary steps to stop the federal government from imposing a carbon tax on our province. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by citizens from Saskatoon. I do so present.
I recognize the member for Saskatoon Newtana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising today to present a petition calling for a public inquiry and forensic audit into the Regina bypass land scandal. The individuals who have signed this petition would like to bring to our attention the following. Land developers purchased 640 acres of land along Tower Road and had the Regina bypass moved to accommodate their developments. Thousands of people were impacted directly and lost their land, homes, businesses, access, life's work, health, history, and future. Land developers were paid up to 80 times more for their land than long-term land, home, and business owners, and the cost of the Regina bypass exploded from $400 million to now over $2 billion. Vinci, a French contractor that is deeply rooted in scandals in Europe, was awarded the contract to build the $2 billion Regina bypass. I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the government of Saskatchewan call for a judicial public inquiry and forensic audit into the entire Regina bypass land scandal. The individuals signing this petition today are from the cities of Regina, Saskatoon, Swift Current, and the community of Vibank. I so submit.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition to get big money out of Saskatchewan politics. And the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan want to bring to our attention the following. That Saskatchewan's outdated Election Act allows corporations, unions, and individuals, even those living outside the province, to make unlimited donations to our province's political parties. We know that the people of Saskatchewan deserve to live in a fair province where all voices are equal and money can't influence politics. But over the past 10 years, the Saskatchewan Party has received $12.61 million in corporate donations, and of that, $2.87 million came from companies outside Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan politics should belong to Saskatchewan people. And we know that the federal government and the provinces of Alberta, Manitoba, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and now British Columbia have moved to limit this influence and level the playing field by banning corporate and union donations to political parties. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to overhaul Saskatchewan's campaign finance laws, to end out-of-province donations, to put a ban on donations from corporations and unions, and to put a donation limit on individual donations. Mr. Speaker, the people signing this petition come from the communities of Regina, the cities of Regina and Moose Jaw. I do so present. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for critical workplace supports for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, those who signed this petition wish to bring to our attention the following. Saskatchewan has the highest rates of domestic violence amongst all of the provinces. In 5 days of paid leave and up to 17 weeks of unpaid leave should be available to workers who are survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, this is what we've called for in our private member's bill, which seeks to provide 5 days paid leave. We've had people throughout the province reach out to us and express how this private member's bill would benefit them specifically. I'd like to read one of those stories into the record. This came from a shelter worker, Mr. Speaker. A mother of two came to the shelter in fear of her partner finding her. Her children were with her and attended school. Partner had in the past called her at her workplace, and she was afraid the partner showing up at her workplace would happen again. The shelter worker suggested utilizing the unpaid work days, which are already available in legislation, but this individual was very worried about losing the day's pay, especially knowing that the stay at the shelter was for only 30 days, and she knew she had to come up with rent and damage deposit. She knew the partner would not be accommodating with money or allowing her to have any furniture or belongings. He makes considerably more money than this individual does. The shelter worker asked if it was paid, if the leave was paid, if that would ease some stress, and she said absolutely. This individual ended up returning home and trying to leave over a span of time. I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call upon the Sask Party government to pass legislation to ensure critical supports in the workplace, including reasonable accommodation and paid and unpaid leave for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, the individuals signing the petition today come from Regina. I do so present.
Hear, hear. I recognize the member for Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition on seed regulations. Mr. Speaker, the petitioners signing this petition want to bring to our attention that the federal government is proposing to pass regulations that would give international seed companies complete control over any seed varieties registered after February 2015. Mr. Speaker, the petitioners want to bring to our attention that farmers would have to pay a royalty even on seed that they themselves grew and wanted to reuse for use in later years. Mr. Speaker, the federal proposals would not give farmers any guarantee that any money would be used for seed research. They don't give any guarantee that the research would be on Canadian crop varieties, and nor do they give any guarantee that the research, the value of the research would be returned to farmers. Mr. Speaker, in the prayer, the petitioners respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan inform the federal government that it's strongly opposed to both endpoint royalties and trailing royalties, that it demands the rights of farmers to freely use their own seed be established and maintained, and demands that any regulatory changes guarantee that research paid by farmers be controlled and directed by farmers. Mr. Speaker, the people signing this petition are from Vanguard, Hagen, Cutknife, and Lloydminster. I so present. Hear, hear.
Reading and receiving petitions. Statements by members. As the member for Last Mountain, Touchwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with a heavy heart that I stand today to acknowledge the passing of Elder Noel Starblanket, who passed away early yesterday at the age of 72. He was a respected elder and leader in our province's Indigenous community and will be remembered for his work in education, politics, and reconciliation. At the age of 24, he became the chief of the Starblanket First Nation, at that time being one of the youngest chiefs in Canada. At age 29, he was appointed president of the National Indian Brotherhood, which is now the Assembly of First Nations. Mr. Speaker, Elder Starblanket was a residential school survivor and spent much of his life recovering from the trauma and reconnecting with his culture. During his road to recovery, he found peace through learning about his Indigenous spirituality from his elders. He was asked by the Office of Treaty Commissioner to share these important teachings through history seminars with teachers for their treaty certification becoming the elder-in-resident at Scott Collegiate, and more recently, as January of last year, he became the elder-in-residence at the University of Saskatchewan. Elder Starblank had loved to share the stories and music of his ancestors and was well known for his wisdom and unique perspective on life. Mr. Speaker, we extend our hearts and sympathies to the Starblank family, the community, and will never forget his work on reconciliation and education in our province. May he rest in peace, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Regina Douglas Park.
Mr. Speaker, on February 6th and 7th, I attended the Sexual Assault Services of Saskatchewan Leadership Forum. The forum brings together Saskatchewan-based organizations and individuals that are working to build a network of services and supports in the area of sexual violence. The presenters at the forum drew from expertise and experience to educate and encourage attendees to continue working to assist those that have experienced sexual assault. I would especially like to recognize the opening speaker, Shayna Pasapa from Power Our Women, for the message she delivered and the hard work she does every day empowering women. Other presenters included Craig Reynolds from the Saskatchewan Rough Riders and Scott McHenry from the Canadian Red Cross Respect Ed program. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan has the second highest rate of sexual assault amongst all the provinces. Sexual assault centres provide incredibly important services. They not only help those recovering from sexual assault, but educate local communities as well. It goes without saying, Mr. Speaker, that these centres should be properly funded. But due to the government's limited funding, centres like the one in the Battlefords area have had to terminate some services. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join with me in thanking Sexual Assault Services of Saskatchewan for hosting such an informative forum, and the sexual assault centres across Saskatchewan for working hard to help those in need. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Kindersley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I would like to recognize a very special constituent of mine. Kinley Hildebrandt is our brave little neighbor that just lives down our street, and today is her 6th birthday. Soon after Kinley was born, she was diagnosed with a serious liver disease called biliary atresia. She had surgery and was doing very well up until last year. Last August, Kinley and her family went to Edmonton to have a transplant assessment, and she was subsequently placed on the transplant list. On March 2nd of this year, Kinley's family got the call they've been praying for. A donor was found, and Kinley would get her new liver the very next day. Mr. Speaker, Kinley is well on her way to recovery. I'm pleased to report that yesterday she was discharged from the hospital for the very first time, and now she gets to stay at Ronald McDonald House in Edmonton until she comes home in June. And today, she gets to go to West Edmonton Mall to the Build-A-Bear store for the first time. So, Mr. Speaker, next week is National Organ and Tissue Donation Awareness Week. This week focuses on raising awareness about the critical need for donors across the nation. Organ donations are life-changing and often life-saving for families like Kinley's. Our commitment to creating a provincial registry will undoubtedly be a good step forward in supporting organ donation. I ask all members to join me in wishing Kinley a happy birthday, a speedy recovery, and I also encourage all members and all people to give the gift of life and become an organ donor. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prince Albert Sparks Theatre performed Calendar Girls over the weekend of March 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. The play is based on a true story of a group of women in England who decided to raise money for their organization by posing in a calendar. The result of their endeavor far exceeded their expectations, and the Calendar Girls became known worldwide. Spark Theatre used the opportunity to raise money for the Rose Garden Hospice. As a freestanding hospice, it'll be the first of its kind in Saskatchewan. All of the proceeds from Calendar Girls went to this cause. Malcolm Jenkins once again showed his generosity to the Rose Garden Hospice by not only committing a $500,000 donation towards the construction of the facility, but also by matching ticket sales to be added to the donation to the Rose Garden Hospice. Mr. Speaker, after all the ticket sales were counted and Malcolm matched the total, a very generous donation of $20,000 was made to the Rose Garden Hospice. Mr. Jenkins is well known in Prince Albert for his generosity and his support of the arts and community initiatives. He is always giving back to our community, and many projects and events would not have gotten off the ground without his support and generous donations. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members join with me in congratulating Spark Theatre, Malcolm Jenkins and Canadian Tire for their generous donation, and to acknowledge the volunteers of the Rose Garden Hospice Association for their vision and their efforts. Thank you.
I recognize a member for Regina University.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to honour Jean Mahoney. Jean is a constituent of mine and has been recognized as a dedicated member of our community, serving humanity for many, many years. As a registered nurse, Jean has become well known throughout Saskatchewan and has contributed to charitable and volunteer organizations locally, provincially, and nationally. Her truly outstanding contributions to healthcare and community have been acknowledged through many awards. The Canadian Volunteer Award, which is meant to inspire Canadians to find new ways of making a difference in their communities. The Saskatchewan Volunteer Award, to recognize outstanding volunteer service and exceptional community involvement. The YWCA Women of Distinction Award, to recognize women whose outstanding achievements contribute to the health and future of our community and are an inspiration to others. And Jean has also received, if this wasn't enough, the Certificate of Appreciation from the Catholic Health Association of Canada and life membership recognition from the Saskatchewan Registered Nurses Association. To this day, Jean continues to volunteer at local healthcare facilities, and she states that one of her future goals is to accomplish as much as possible in each day in humble service where it is needed most. And did I mention that Jean is turning 90 years old this fall? And she had planned to be here today, but is unable to, but I know she's watching from home right now, so hi, Jean. Anyway, I'd like to thank you for making our province, Jean, a better place for all of us to live. Thank you very much.
As the member for the Battlefords.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, Mr. Speaker, our Battlefords North Stars have treated us to a great season of exciting hockey this past winter. But as the regular season ended and the playoffs began, the level of excitement rose significantly for our North Stars fans. The quarterfinals began with a series against Flin Flon. We jumped out to a quick 3-0 lead, and in the fourth game, we were a few seconds away from winning the series and ending Flin Flon's season when they came back and scored. Eventually, they took us to 7 games, but our guys came out victorious in the end. We continued to pick up momentum in the semifinals, and in fact, we got out our brooms and swept the Yorkton Terriers in 4 games. And now we're into the SJHL final facing the Melfort Mustangs. We split the first 2 games this past weekend in North Battleford, a 6-2 win on Friday night, but dropped a close one on Saturday, 1-0. Mr. Speaker, the next 2 games are in Melfort this week. The Civic Centre was near capacity for those 2 home games, and I know that it's going to be packed again this Friday for Game 5. This is going to be a great series between 2 great teams, but in the end, I'm absolutely positive the Stars are going to prevail, and I can't wait to see the member from Melfort wearing my Stars jersey for a day in this legislature. That's going to be a bit of a bittersweet victory, as there's no way in God's green earth that he can do justice to that revered uniform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Melfort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I appreciate the member from the Battleford's youthful optimism, let me tell you about the other horse in this race. Mr. Speaker, during my grade 12 year, the Mustangs were born, and now 30 years later, some of the guys that I grew up with are now the coaches, and some are even parents of a few of the players. Over the years, we've had some good teams, but this year is one of the best in terms of talent and character. The member from the Battleford seems quite confident of victory, but his overconfidence reminds me of a king who once boasted before the battle. The opposing king answered his bravado with words that I will leave with my friend. Quote, "Let not him who straps on the armor boast as he who's taking it off." The series is tied at a game apiece, and the next battle is scheduled for tonight in Melfort at the Northern Lights Palace. And Mr. Speaker, no matter who comes out on top, we're all in for some great hockey. There can only be one champion, only one true North Star, and we will find out which that team will be. Between you and me, Mr. Speaker, I think that when the series is all over, we're going to see how a diehard North Battleford fan looks in Mustangs green and blue. So, thank you. Go Mustangs.
Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prior to his 2017 election as
guess it was into 2018 election as Sask Party leader, the Premier said in a 2017 interview with anti-abortion group Right Now, and I quote, "There may be some opportunities as we move forward under my leadership with respect to a caucus discussion around the potentiality of parental notification." Just to be clear, parental notification or parental consent would fly in the face of medical ethics or standard medical practice in terms of the rights of women and in terms of our long-standing practice of treating mature minors as they should be treated. At the time, the Star Phoenix reported that the caucus had already had discussions on parental notification back in 2016 and had received a clear legal opinion that that would be unconstitutional to proceed with. Was the Premier part of that original discussion and aware of that legal opinion when he made those statements?
I recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we've had a number of discussions on a number of different issues as a caucus, Mr. Speaker, as a governing caucus, to come up with policies on behalf of the very best policies in our mind on behalf of the people of the province that we represent, Mr. Speaker. With respect to this topic, with the topic of abortion, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Health said the other day, this is a moot point. The Supreme Court has ruled with respect to this, Mr. Speaker. We've received advice with respect to that through the numerous discussions that we've had over the last number of years, Mr. Speaker. It's the law of the land, it's the policy of this government, and I support the policy of this government.
Here, here. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if the Premier was aware that what he said he would consider and allow discussions on was unconstitutional and essentially impossible, a moot point, as he says, why did he make those statements?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we discuss numerous items in our caucus room, Mr. Speaker. We do that on behalf of the people that we represent, the diverse opinions that we at times have in this caucus, Mr. Speaker, I think are reflective of the diversity of our great province of Saskatchewan and the people that inhabit our communities, the people that we represent, Mr. Speaker. We're pleased to go into our caucus room and have those discussions, Mr. Speaker, to come up with policies that we feel are best to represent the majority of the people of this province. Mr. Speaker, we do that on a number of issues, and when we come out of that room, Mr. Speaker, we fully support those policies because we believe they are the best for this province, the best for the growth of our economy, the best for the growth of the opportunities of the people that live here and the people that we hope to attract to live here in the future, Mr. Speaker. That has been how we have conducted ourselves to date. That's how we'll continue to conduct ourselves.
Here, here. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Premier, to quote the Premier again, from that same November 2017 article, in Saskatchewan, in respect to parental involvement and what level, you know, we could have a look at that here in this province, whether it be parental notification for our youth, whether it be actual parental consent. These are discussions we have actually had. But I think the ongoing discussion is important for any governing party and any governing party under my leadership to have. Only 6 months later, with the position as leader now secured and no longer dependent on support from the anti-abortion lobby, the Premier instead told the House that, I quote, "These conversations are not occurring, Mr. Chair, and there's not an intention to move forward with that." Which of these statements is correct? Will those conversations continue, or are they not going to happen?
Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, let me add one more statement to the mix here as well, a statement that was released the day after, I believe. The first statement that's being read in, Mr. Speaker, is this, and I quote, this was a statement put out by myself on November 23rd, 2007, and I quote, "Under the leadership of Brad Wall over the last decade, the Saskatchewan Party government has been clear that we respect the current federal law, and the rulings of the Supreme Court of Canada regarding abortion. As elected representatives, every member of the Legislative Assembly has the obligation to represent the views of their constituents, and as leader, I will always be open to a responsible caucus discussion on sensitive issues such as abortion and encourage members to speak to their experience as well as representing their constituents." End quote, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the readback of the quote, but the quote fails to answer the question on whether or not those conversations will be allowed to happen going forward, or whether what he said afterwards is clear that those won't happen anymore.
Recognize the Premier.
the Leader of the Opposition wants to be privy to the caucus discussions of the Saskatchewan Party governing party, Mr. Speaker, he is going to have to join the party.
Hear, hear.
Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not a particularly inviting invitation, Mr. Speaker. But it would be interesting to know if the Premier is able to answer questions directly that are asked to him directly. He said that he would allow conversations on something that he knows is not constitutional, is not possible to proceed with. Is he going to allow those conversations to proceed?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
We've had numerous discussions in caucus, Mr. Speaker. The policy of the government of Saskatchewan is clear. I've said it. I've said it a number of times over the course of the last number of days, Mr. Speaker. This is the law. We respect the law of the land. We support the government or the policy of the government of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, this is the case today. This will be the case moving forward.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's difficult to get a very clear answer, so we'll try one more time, Mr. Speaker. Just a very simple statement from the Premier would suffice. Would this Premier ever consider parental consent,
yes or no?
parental notification, or allow that discussion to happen in his caucus?
Yes or no,
Scott?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to discuss on the floor of the Legislative Assembly the discussions that we are going to have behind closed doors in the Saskatchewan Party the government caucus, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, those discussions that we have, the people of this province can rest assured are on behalf of their best interests, Mr. Speaker, and we have, as I said, a diversity in views on a number of different topics in this caucus. I'm sure the members opposite caucus as well on a number of different topics have a diverse views. I would hope they do, Mr. Speaker, because they should, in essence, be representative of the views of the people across this province, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to have those discussions in caucus, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to come forward with policy that we believe best represents the people that ultimately we represent in this province, Mr. Speaker, and we'll do it in good faith.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was a long way of avoiding saying yes or no. But we'll come back to an element of the question that I think has yet to be answered and fully explored, which is why did the Premier choose to make those statements? Why did he say that discussion of parental notification, parental consent is something that he would like to see under his leadership? Why did he tell that particular political action group what he did? He knew it wasn't possible. But he went out and got an answer that indicated a very different story. Was he willing to just say anything he could to have the votes of that group?
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, once again, I am going to say this. We have caucus discussions on this side, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of the province. With respect to the issue at hand, we have had a number of discussions over the course of the last number of years since my election to this Legislative Assembly in 2011. And the fact of the matter is this today, Mr. Speaker, and this as we move forward is there is a law. The Supreme Court has decided with respect to abortion in this province and across this nation. The policy of the government of Saskatchewan supports the law of the nation, Mr. Speaker, and I support that policy.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're pleased to hear that commitment to supporting the law, and we'd like to hear a commitment that parental consent and parental notification will remain off the table. But the question still remains, why, when running for leader, did the Premier choose to make those statements? We had other members who were running, members of the Cabinet today. We have the Minister for Central Services who had to walk back some pretty extreme statements on his position on abortion. We had another candidate talking about using the notwithstanding clause. Did the Premier feel he needed to get into that arms race and pander to that particular voting group? Why did he choose to say what he did to right now? And notice, those statements are still up online. They're still having the same impact.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, no matter how many times we answer the question, asked the question, Mr. Speaker, the answer remains the same. We have a number of discussions in caucus on a number of different issues. We'll continue to have those as we move forward, Mr. Speaker. If the Leader of the Opposition wants to know exactly what is being discussed in the government caucus, he's going to have to resign as a member of that party, put his name forward through the election process, Mr. Speaker, likely run in a nomination for a member of this party, and ultimately be successful. The only caveat within there, Mr. Speaker, is he would have to have the approval, given his history, to run as a member of this party. Mr. Speaker, we will continue, and we will make no apologies for having, at what are at times, very sensitive discussions representing the diverse views across our province, Mr. Speaker, and we're proud to be able to come together as a caucus, Mr. Speaker, and represent the people that we do, and we're very proud of the policies that we put forward. With respect to abortion, this government has been very clear. It's been very clear for a number of years now, Mr. Speaker, and will be clear into the future.
That's right.
Recognized Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing to see such a flippant response on such a serious issue. When comments from the Minister for Rural and Remote Health recently, when comments from the Premier prior to his election as leader of the Saskatchewan Party have sowed distrust among the public, have made it harder for women in Saskatchewan to be sure that this government is working to make sure they've got access to all the services they deserve to have, Mr. Speaker. My question once again, why did the Premier choose to say what he said prior to the leadership and then so quickly change his mind as soon as he was elected?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I can read the statement in again with respect to November 23rd, but the fact of the matter is this, Mr. Speaker. We have been so very clear with respect to this policy, Mr. Speaker, around abortion, how the government of Saskatchewan does support the law of our nation of Canada. Mr. Speaker, as we go into an election, that will be, well, in a number of months, a year and a half, I suppose, that will be very clear. With respect to the process, Mr. Speaker, around funding a drug that is available here in the province, Mr. Speaker, the drug of mifegymiso. We'll make our way through that process, Mr. Speaker, in the very same way that we do other drugs that we look at from time to time, taking off of the formulary, Mr. Speaker, and taking into a fully taxpayer-funded scenario, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is there is a process for this. The Minister of Health is working his way through gathering that information through the ministry now, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health, who is the lead on this file, will then bring that information to Cabinet, Mr. Speaker, and we will ultimately make that policy decision, again, representing the people across this province, as we always aim to do.
Recognized Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question remains, why did the Premier choose to speak to Right Now and to give that opinion that he would allow conversation to continue to explore parental notification and parental consent within his caucus? Why did he say that and then say the opposite once elected? What was his purpose in saying that, and what should people take away in terms of his commitment to what his statements are at any point in that process?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
My apologies, Mr. Minister, or Mr. Speaker. I left out one sentence of the statement that was released on November the 23rd, but I would like the opportunity to allow to read this in now. November 23rd, 2017. That was long before the end of any leadership election on this side, Mr. Speaker, and it goes like this, and I quote, "As leader of the Saskatchewan Party, as Premier of Saskatchewan, I will continue the current government's position. I would not introduce any legislation on abortion." Mr. Speaker, that is my statement on November 23rd, 2017.
There you go. Here.
Recognized Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, as pointed out, and the addition is welcome, but continues to fail to clarify the question of whether these discussions will be taking place around parental consent and parental notification. Something else that the Premier said during that race and during that same interview that relates to this very question, he said, and I quote, he said he would not pursue discussion regarding changes to abortion access, and yet he and the other three leadership candidates in his caucus all stated that they would allow free votes on this issue. So there appears to be yet another glaring inconsistency here between what the Premier was telling supporters before his selection and after. Which is it? Will the Premier be whipping his caucus? Will he be instructing his caucus to respect reproductive rights? Or will he be allowing free votes, as he said during the leadership?
I recognize the Premier.
It's going to be very clear and concise with respect to this, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to read this in one more time. As leader of the Saskatchewan Party and Premier of the province of Saskatchewan, I will continue the current government's position and would not, important word, would not introduce any legislation on abortion. End quote, Mr. Speaker. My statement from November 23rd, 2017. If there's no legislation, there will be no vote.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know from a Right Now press release congratulating the new leader of the Sask Party on his hard-fought battle to secure that position. And I quote, Right Now sold hundreds of memberships throughout the leadership campaign. Aside from promoting him as their second top choice based on his statements, did campaigners from Right Now or any other anti-abortion lobby organization help directly with the Premier's leadership campaign in any way?
All right. It's a warning in regards to keep your questions in regards to the administration of government and ministerial portfolios, Premier's portfolio. You've drifted far away. Thank you. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Premier's statements may have been a deciding factor in that leadership race, I'm wondering if since that time, in his role as Premier, has he met or called with Right Now or any other organizations, and how did those organizations respond to his very abrupt change once elected, and have they expressed any disappointment to him at his immediate about-face?
Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, as over the course of the last just over a year now, I've met with a number of different organizations. I do not recall a meeting with this particular organization at any point in time, actually, Mr. Speaker, in person. Although I met a number of people over the course of the leadership race, as did a number of other leadership candidates and people on this side, colleagues on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, as we conducted, and I'm very proud to be part of, as I know many leadership candidates were on this side of this House that worked very, very hard for a number of months, Mr. Speaker, and worked collectively in what was the largest leadership event, I think, in the history of the province, most certainly in the history of our Saskatchewan Party, Mr. Speaker. Over 27,000 people across the province participated in that event, Mr. Speaker. It was an event that we were very proud of the size of that event, Mr. Speaker, the people across the province that participated, and I think in fairness believe in the good governance of the Saskatchewan Party over the course of the last decade, Mr. Speaker, and want to keep that party performing policy on behalf of all of the people across the province so that we can continue to grow our economy, grow our opportunities, Mr. Speaker, grow the opportunity for that next generation. That's what we intend to do.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very nice that the Premier is proud of the leadership campaign and how that went. But one of the elements of that leadership campaign was a very heated debate around abortion and access to abortion, with a number of different opinions and pretty extreme opinions expressed by some of the candidates. The Premier walked right into that arms race around that discussion, and he said, and the quotes, I've already read them, but he said that he would consider and allow that consideration of parental consent and parental notification. Why did he say that? And why, when he corrected it, if he thinks that statement corrected, which I object to, I don't think it's anywhere near clear enough. But if he thinks it corrected it, why didn't he call up Right Now and say, take down that interview, don't have those statements up, they don't represent my opinion? Or did he want those statements up so that he could continue to pander to that particular voting group?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
I don't know if we need to get into comparing the size of one another's leadership race, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, it's not good for you, Ryan.
I don't think that's where we need to be on the floor of this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, but I will say this. there was over 27,000 people that participated in the leadership race of the Saskatchewan Party. It was a race that myself and my colleagues that I ran alongside in that race, Mr. Speaker, worked extremely hard on not only as their elected members in our respective constituencies at that time, Mr. Speaker, but worked extremely hard to travel across the province and engage with all sorts of people of the very diverse opinions across this province, Mr. Speaker, and from many people's strength is the motto of this province. It's the motto of this party, Mr. Speaker, and I would put forward that we should never forget that as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, in ensuring that we put policy in place in this province that provides that opportunity that we all know and want for that next generation, Mr. Speaker. There are a number of groups that we met with over the course of that time. There are many, many individuals from corner to corner to corner to corner in this province that we met with, Mr. Speaker. It was a process that we were all very proud to be a part of, Mr. Speaker, and we're very proud of the policies that we put forward, including with respect to where we are with the Saskatchewan government's policy on abortion.
Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier had the support of the Rural and Remote Health Minister in the leadership campaign. A minister we know recently told an anti-abortion group that he would use his professional capacity to advance their cause. Has that minister put any pressure on the Premier since that time? You know, the Premier stated that minister crossed a small line. Well, I tell you, this line doesn't appear small to me. He encouraged a group to fight against a law that his role and his commitment to our Constitution requires him to uphold. He suggested he'd use his professional capacity to support that fight when his role is to get patients access to all forms of care. This is not a small line. And as Action Canada pointed out, it erodes public trust. This Premier took no action when that minister or the Minister of Highways showed up at Yellow Vest rallies. He took no action when this minister showed up and shared his views at an anti-abortion rally. What signal does this Premier think that this sends to his caucus and the people of the province? If the Premier simply brushes off such significant errors as a small line, and what consequences will we see if other caucus members cross that same line?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would say this. The Rural and Remote Health Minister, Mr. Speaker, I alluded to it, had crossed the line, Mr. Speaker, with his comments, Mr. Speaker. I would point all the members of this House and the people in this province to his actions over the course of the last 4.5 years serving the people of this province. I would point them specifically to September 2017 when there was a decision made, Mr. Speaker, under the direction of the current Health Minister, Mr. Speaker. But the Rural and Remote Health Minister was in the exact same position at that point in time when Mifigay-Miso was actually added to the formulary, Mr. Speaker, actually made accessible to the people of the province of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, we've seen this time and time again where we see the Leader of the Opposition and others, Mr. Speaker, do what essentially amounts to drive-by smears of people, residents of this province. We saw it with Jason LeBlanc, Mr. Speaker, a farmer and an auctioneer and a hard-working individual in the community of Estevan. We saw it with our Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, it should not be passing strange that we again see it here today with our Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Mifigay-Miso has been approved by Health Canada since 2015. We were one of the last provinces to add it to the formulary, where we still haven't added full coverage despite every other province going down that road. 4 years, Mr. Speaker. You wonder why there's some suspicion that this might be being slow-walked, Mr. Speaker, why there's some concern that this isn't moving quickly as it should be, Mr. Speaker. We know, of course, there are processes to determine how to cover medications, but the evidence is in front of us. Evidence on patient safety, evidence on need for access, and evidence on cost effectiveness. This is a decision that can be made right here and now and should already have been made. Why does the Premier not just stand up and say, I commit to funding Mifigay-Miso? Or are there still barriers within his cabinet to doing so?
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Premier.
Speaker. I would just point the Leader of the Opposition to my previous answer with respect to the current Minister of Rural and Remote Health that was in that same portfolio, Mr. Speaker, when Mifi-Gaimiso was made accessible to the people of the province of Saskatchewan a couple of years ago now. The process moving forward, Mr. Speaker, and we do follow the process as this pharmaceutical drug is made available to the people of the province as it is on the formulary. The process moving forward is not a question of accessibility. It's actually a question of whether this pharmaceutical should be paid for by the taxpayers of the province, for the people of the province, Mr. Speaker, regardless of their particular income. The Minister of Health, the lead on this file, Mr. Speaker, will be taking the information that he receives from the Ministry of Health. Mr. Speaker, he'll bring that through the Cabinet process, as he has informed me. This will be a Cabinet decision, Mr. Speaker, and this will be a policy decision that will be made in the best interests of all of the diverse people that we represent in this great province of Saskatchewan.
Ministerial statements. I recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier today I had the pleasure of announcing that for the first time in Saskatchewan's history, we will be expanding the provincial curricula to include Adene, Nakwa, and Mischief 10, 20, and 30 level courses. School divisions province-wide will have the chance to offer these Indigenous language courses in the fall of 2019. These new language courses will join an already available provincial pre-course. The development of these courses will be based upon existing locally developed courses which were created by school divisions or First Nations educational authorities. Mr. Speaker, we're proud to be able to increase the accessibility of these courses to Saskatchewan students. We understand the incorporation of Indigenous language, culture, and perspectives raise the level of engagement and successes of First Nations and Métis students. Mr. Speaker, the creation of these provincial courses will be a considerable benefit for students as they will receive regular credit on their high school transcripts, which may be recognized by post-secondary admission. This initiative also aligns with the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action and supports the Joint Task Force recommendations, which recognizes the value of Indigenous languages and the substantial role they play in preserving cultural traditions and knowledge. Treaty Commissioner Mary Culberson has shown her support for the new courses by saying, quote, "This renewed effort to acknowledge the significance of Indigenous languages and expanding learning opportunities is an important step in creating inclusive learning environments for students and a meaningful step toward reconciliation in Saskatchewan." And Métis Nation Saskatchewan Education Minister Earl Cook agreed with those new courses will have a meaningful impact on Indigenous students, stating, quote, "The retention and preservation of our Indigenous languages has been an important focus of mine, and it's encouraging to see a Métis language included in these efforts being made within our provincial education system." Mr. Speaker, we've also heard from the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation, who show their support for increasing the availability of Indigenous languages. Mr. Speaker, this is another important demonstration of our government using local voices to help make informed decisions that better satisfy the learning needs in our school. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Here, here.
Recognize the member for Janet Elphinstone Centre.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and on behalf of the official opposition, first I'd like to thank the Minister for advance copy of the notes so that we might give some thought to this response. And certainly we say thank you very much for some good news in terms of advancing the cause of Indigenous languages in this province of ours, Mr. Speaker. And certainly we note the good work that is going on in many different quarters, Mr. Speaker, on a federal level, action on this, the provincial level, but the way that we strive to catch up to the good work that has been going on for decades and despite numerous challenges and barriers, Mr. Speaker, in communities like La Loche, in communities like Isla Cross, in communities like Key, Cody, and Kisakus, Mr. Speaker. And in terms of to bring the Dene language, the Nakaway language, Michif into the provincial curriculum, Mr. Speaker, along with Nehewewin, we think is a good move. And again, to be here on the floor of the Assembly today, Mr. Speaker, alongside someone like the member from Athabasca, Mr. Speaker, a proud champion for Indigenous language, Mr. Speaker, it's something that we know there have been no shortage of heroes in this fight, Mr. Speaker. So I'm also reminded today, Mr. Speaker, of another proud Indigenous member of this Assembly, the member from Cumberland for many years, Mr. Keith Goulet, and a tremendous champion for the Cree language, Mr. Speaker, and who would speak Nihewin on the floor of this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and one time for his efforts was rewarded by an anonymous note from one of the members on the opposite side, not the present batch, of course, Mr. Speaker, but was rewarded with a note for his efforts. It said, "Quit, speak in English, you sound like a babbling fool." Mr. Speaker, we've come a long way, and this is a good announcement today, and we're glad to see it. But we got a lot further to go in this province, Mr. Speaker. Egosy.
Introduction of bills. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. I recognize
He can't. He hasn't.
I recognize the chair of the Standing Committee on the Economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Economy to report Bill number 137, the Sask Energy Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2018, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? Recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to waive consideration of the Committee of the Whole on this bill and that the bill be now read for the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration Committee of the Whole on Bill number 137 and that the bill be now read a third time. Is leave granted? The Minister may proceed to move third reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 137 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? It's a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Orders of the day.
Written questions. Question number 76, asked by Ms. Chartier.
Recognize the Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to order the answer to question number 76.
Ordered. Question 76. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, so the committees may continue their good work today, I move that this House do now adjourn.
It's been moved that the Assembly do now adjourn. It's a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried. This Assembly now stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.